Dexton Lake, how are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm very good.
Fantastic.
It's fun being on this.
Yeah, man, we've already been having a good time. We've been going for a while here. You are a government affairs officer and essentially a communication medium between the Farm Bureau of Idaho and the government of Idaho. You also help dum-dums like me understand what's happening in the state, why we should care about it. And today we're talking about predation of animals on say livestock or things that farmers and ranchers grow. The best part about this that I love is that I found out recently that bunny rabbits are listed as predators in the state of Idaho because if you're growing like alfalfa or something like that bunnies like, and this is your livelihood, you're like, I need to grow as much of this plant as humanly possible to sell it to as many people at the highest possible price. God bless you. That's capitalism. And hundreds of bunnies come through and rip through your crop. Boy, it is bunny bashing season. Yeah. And because of that, they're listed as a predator, which allows you to engage them and eliminate them in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing what animals can do to agriculture.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter the animal, right? So for an instance, this isn't necessarily agriculture, but my grandpa broke his leg in a gopher hole.
Ooh.
And it was out. He was, I think he was fixing fence or something and just stepped in the wrong place and broke it. But then, you and I were talking about how my dad was having problems with geese coming in, wiping out a grain field or grain seed that he had planted. And so...
Okay. But hey, help me understand this. So your dad puts down all this seed, then like a couple days or a week later or something, a dump truck of geese show up because they're migrating south. They're like, oh, sizzler, boom.
They would actually be migrating north. But
excuse me. So, yeah, right, because you're in the spring, right?
Yeah.
So wrong side of the season. So they're coming up north. They're like, awesome, stop in, grab a bite. And why couldn't your dad just go out there with a shotgun and start pecking them, or like whatever kind of firearm or whatever to get them out there? Like what was the problem with removing the geese?
Because it's not geese season. And where his farm was a bird refuge.
Oh no.
And so he was able to secure depredation tags and was able to do some elimination. But it had to take some convincing because yes, it was out of season, but also bird refuge.
So the depredation, for those that aren't familiar with it, the depredation is the concept that, hey, I'm engaging in lawful business in the state of Idaho with, let's say, agriculture or something, or ranching. And there is a wildlife entity, be that, a rabbit, a goose, a wolf, a grizzly bear, something like that, that has entered into my business area and has caused me meaningful damage, right? And not... I don't know what checks and balances have to be done to show that like you attempted to, you didn't intentionally like drive people into like a grizzly bear den or something, or drive your sheep in there or something. Like engaging in normal standard practices in ranching, but you can go to the state and say, hey, this has befallen me. This grizzly bear showed up, or these geese showed up. They have pillaged my field or my cattle or my sheep, and it has cost me X number of dollars. Now, in those situations, there are many things that can happen, but the first is you don't just get to show up and say, hey, these geese or this wolf or this grizzly bear, whatever, like hurt me somehow. And the state's like, oh, okay, great. Like here's carte blanche to either kill the animal or here's some money back from the damage you ensued. Like there's an actual investigation that goes on because we're giving people taxpayer dollars and we're drawing outside the lines with laws that, for instance, would be protecting geese during a certain season or protecting endangered species like a wolf or protecting, an almost endangered species like a grizzly bear. That's an accurate summation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, mostly. So the way I understand the statute definition of depredation versus predation is depredation is wildlife killing non-wildlife animals, whereas predation is wildlife killing wildlife animals.
Sure.
So that's the two distinctions. So you'll hear Fish and Game talk about predation. They're talking about like wolves killing elk.
Right.
Whereas when you're talking about depredation, you're talking about wolves killing livestock.
But it's also like you can have there are instances where wild elk would get into a place that had somebody who was growing some particular crop and they would ravage the crop. And then people are like, hey, they just ate $15,000 worth of my crop.
And that's considered elk depredation.
Right, exactly. So it's not just wildlife on an animal. It could be wildlife on any agricultural product, be that plant or animal.
Correct.
Gotcha.
And so that's seen a lot in the state is non-predatorial animals causing damage to agriculture. There are instances in the state and of people who will quote unquote safe harbor deer and elk. Basically, they because it's their private property, they'll let deer and elk and other wildlife graze on the field that they have, but at the cost of the neighbor next to them who may not want elk or deer. This is especially true for elk on their property. And what people can and sometimes do is if they are in a particular game management unit and somebody gets an elk tag for that game management unit, then they'll say, okay, yeah, you can come hunt on our property, but because we're safe harboring this elk, it's going to be easy for you. Here's the cost of hunting on our property.
What is the cost to the associated unit? Because I have heard the private ranch that becomes this essentially safe harbor for or an attractive environment for elk or whatever it might be, and then them selling the tags to have random people come on. It's like, oh, $50,000. Hey, there's a big old guy right over there. Thank you for the money. Tag, go for it. So you have that, but what's the cost? I have not heard of the cost associated with like a neighboring rancher or farmer who's like, hey, I have my ranch farm, whatever it is right here. I don't want those damn elk coming over this fence. Is it that this person is engaging in some type of agriculture that the elk just hop over the fence and go eat it and then hop back over and then like you can't do anything about it?
Mm-hmm. That's pretty much until the elk are on your property that you don't want it to be on. Fish and Game's hands are largely tied because of private property rights. And of course, we love private property rights in the state and we respect those. But then you get into the minutia of, the line of somebody wanting versus not wanting. It definitely does happen. And so that's something that happens in this state. And I mean, what can you do, right?
What can you do? Right. And you could do preemptive strikes though, right? Like say I'm the rancher that doesn't want, or the farmer that doesn't want the elk on, I can go to Fish and Game and say, hey, I've had a bad experience in the past. They are not currently on my property the second, but I would like the okay to engage them, if they jump over and start eating my stuff. You don't have to, it's not like the act doesn't have to be happening on the moment, right? Or you could say, hey, I would like to hire somebody to take care of it if they do indeed come on, right? Something of that nature.
Well, to an extent, yes, because you can't, of course, without tags, kill anything.
Sure,
but yeah, you can chase them off and do what you can. You can do a noise distraction. There's other preventative things that you can do, tall fences. But that of course has a tremendous expense to it. For damage to agricultural ground, and it's difficult to assess the damage. Just as us talking, but there is a method that Fish and Game employs to do that. So when it comes to elk depredation and other grazing wildlife, they will send out one of their people to investigate and say, yeah, it looks like, here in this grain field, elk did come and depredate this, looking at what was damaged and what is harvestable and what's not.
They come up with a monetary loss.
With a monetary loss, and then the producer could say, yes, that's fair, let's cut the check, or they can arbitrate it, and there's a whole arbitration process, kind of an appeal process to that number, and there's a lot to it, but basically that's how it goes. That's how it goes.
Now we've been pretty much talking about wildlife eating or consuming agricultural products, right? Like plants. But Idaho has a very rich history on attempting to deal with wolf and grizzly bear depredation. We used to have, smaller now, but Idaho used to have an incredible sheep industry, less so now. Sheep and wool growers, obviously. It has an incredible cattle program. And the reintroduction of wolves in 96 is obviously a big turning point where it's like, no. I mean, there were wolves here in very, very, very limited numbers, but wolves coming down not only started frustrating people because of wolf predation against other wild animals like elk, right? But they also started costing industries money.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. In the mid '90s, the wolf was reintroduced into Idaho, and I can't even remember off the top of my head the number that they introduced, that they brought in. And mind you, I was born in '95, so this has been a problem that has been perpetuating throughout my entire lifetime. And so, there was a period of time as the years went on that the wolf was delisted, listed, and
Sure.
and so in 2011 it was finally taken off the list, and has been off since.
And that's the endangered species list.
Correct. Thank you. And so since then, to be able to recoup the loss of a wolf depredating on an animal, an agricultural animal, be it cow or sheep. There is a process that an individual has to go through. They have to call Wildlife Services, which is under USDA's Animal Plant Health Inspection Service. And they have a robust team that is responsible for, as quick as they can, going and investigating the body of the animal that was killed. You have to have a body. And so what happens then is they'll cut the animal open. They'll look for bite marks. They'll look for raking, which is the claws tearing across the animal, and just basically signs that would indicate that this animal was killed by a wolf, and also a grizzly. It's the same process they use for grizzlies and for mountain lions and black bears as well. But since we're talking about wolves, we'll just focus on that for now. And so they use a grading system, more or less. They have a form that they fill out, and to get money, as is right now, it has to be confirmed. Beyond reasonable doubt, this definitely was killed by a wolf. Then there's the probable, which is, okay, it looks like it could have been, but I can't say for sure, then possible, then basically unknown. And for the last 5 to 10 years, that number of confirmations has been steadily decreasing. Now, there's arguments as to why that's the case. Oh, wolves aren't attacking livestock anymore. Okay, maybe. For argument's sake, let's say that's a reason. Or what some producers say is less and less of these inspections or investigations, are being confirmed. The evidence hasn't necessarily changed, but the process in which they do it seems to have changed.
Gotcha. So the number of investigations does not appear to be dropping, but the number of investigations that yield a result saying, yes, this is confirmed, is dropping. So like if you have 100 of them, it used to be 50 of, let's just say arbitrary numbers.
Right.
It used to be 50 of them that were confirmed and 50 that were like, probable or unknown or whatever it is. And now we still have 100 investigations, but we're, instead of 50 confirmed, we're like 40 or 30 confirmed. And then the other 60 or 70 are probable or possible or unknown.
You're mostly right.
Mostly right.
And so
that's a first.
What has happened is less and less people are calling for the inspection because they feel like, well, I'm just not going to get a confirmation anyway, so why waste my time? And so so not only that, but that's an argument that that pro-wolf individuals use, and is, hey, less and less people are calling. Obviously, it's not an issue. No, they have to take the time, the opportunity cost of calling and deciding whether or not it's even worth the time to have Wildlife Services call.
Is there any cost
or come out?
Is there any cost to a rancher to have them come out?
Nope.
So it's essentially just like, okay, I got to stop everything. I got to call this guy or gal. They got to come out. I got to preserve, because essentially what this is a, I don't want to be dramatic and say crime scene, but there's like a forensic investigation that's going to go on down to the point of like getting on the ground, looking for footprints. You're skinning the animal. The nature of different predators and how they kill, right? Like a bear jumping on the back and scraping off the back, or hamstrings getting taken out, or, getting suffocated, like all of these different things. It's a real investigation.
Correct.
So if this happened somewhere where like you're doing business and trying to deal with these other animals, you're like, okay, I got to like preserve this whole area or they're going to come out. And so you essentially just have to stop operations. So I could see that potentially some people are like, look, it's not even worth it anymore.
Right. And you're highlighting something that's very important is the preservation part. Because you have to understand a lot of this is taking place on government ground that cattle are grazing on. This isn't necessarily taking place to the largest extent, in feedlots or anything like that.
Sure.
It could in theory, but it's largely taking place on this government ground or even private ground where they're grazing mostly in the summertime. And it happens in the summer fall times as well. But the preservation part is key, because if you have a cow that, for argument's sake, was killed by a wolf, and you have to preserve that for long enough for them to come look at it, because then what starts happening is the sun and the heat starts decaying that body and starts decaying some of the evidence. So your likelihood of getting a confirmed just starts dwindling with time. And so you have to ask yourself, do I have the availability? Do I have the capability of preserving this body, this crime scene? And a lot of producers, rightfully so, use that as a term. You are looking at basically an murdered animal, and you have to preserve what you have right there. And so even the time factor that exists, especially in the summer heat, is
a real thing.
Is a real thing.
Now, again, please understand when I ask you this, I have no idea.
Right, of course.
But is it possible that both of these things are true? That like some portion of the decrease of reporting is from people actually saying like, okay, well, I don't care. I'm like a disgruntled or discouraged rancher. I'm not going to call. And part of it is that we've had a decrease in predation or depredation.
You could argue that, yes, both of it's true. But what is something that the industry side argues a lot is that because of the way that we have worked to deal with wolves, they have progressively gotten smarter and have become accustomed to, okay, well, government trappers and trappers that are contracted, they'll go trap in these certain areas. Well, wolves have learned, okay, I shouldn't be here because my pack gets attacked here, or so I'm not going to hang out here. So they know where to hide, and they've moved. I mean, animals are animals. They are living, breathing, smart things, and so that's an argument that's used, is that wolves have changed how they pursue livestock. So yeah, it could be argued, but it's not taking into account what we were talking about earlier. Just because somebody doesn't call doesn't mean it's not happening.
Right.
Just because, I mean, the analogy that was used earlier was, just because your teenager hit a car doesn't mean, and didn't call insurance or the police, doesn't mean that your teenager didn't hit the car.
Right. The lack of reporting doesn't mean an instance didn't happen.
Right.
Right. Like just because you didn't find out that your kid didn't lie to you doesn't mean your kid didn't lie to you.
Correct.
Right. It just means you don't have the evidence to prove it.
Right. And so you can't blame producers for being exacerbated by, the time commitment of trying to preserve a scene with the unknowing of this may or may not be confirmed at all.
Right.
And so the way that it works after that is, so say hypothetically it is confirmed.
Right.
Up until this last legislative session, the recourse was the Office of Species Conservation under the governor's office submits for federal grants to pay for depredation payouts, basically the loss of the animal, the value of that animal based off of fair market value at that time. And then for preventative measures. So prevention could be, range riders, dogs, sound machine, or
Sure.
Whatever.
Right.
There's not a whole lot of limit to that. Well, that's the other thing that's been happening is the money that we've been getting from the feds has also been, up until this last year, has been decreasing. At one time it was above 100,000, then it dipped below 100,000. And then for the last funding cycle the funding cycles aren't on a calendar year, but basically the last funding cycle, we got under $25,000.
And that's from the federal government saying, hey, you guys have had some manner of a monetary loss from depredation, let's say from wolves, and this is the money you get. So they're essentially saying that, hey, Idaho, you can go ahead and fund your own stuff. Like, we're not involved in this.
So that's part of the problem that a lot of these producers have, is this is the federal government basically giving table scraps to the state when it was the federal government who initiated this problem anyway, back in the 90s. And so if you think about how far, it was about 24,000, I think it was $24,098, somewhere around there, for payout for confirmed loss, and what a $1,200 animal is worth when it's killed. That $24,000 doesn't go very far, of course, right? That's simple math.
Roughly 20 animals.
Right.
Right.
And so
how many animals are we losing? Like, how short was that $24,098 from the actual monetary loss of confirmed?
So what happens is when there's not enough money to so what'll happen is the Office of Species Conservation, after Wildlife Services confirms, the producer gets the paper that said yes, it's confirmed, and then the producer is responsible for taking that to the Office of Species Conservation, who then just cuts the check. And they collect the forms of confirmed over the course of the year, and then at the end of the year, if there's not enough to pay out, then it's prorated. And so either way, the producer takes a loss. They lost the animal, or they get prorated.
Right.
And so I can't answer that question for sure, how much we were short.
But like how many animals were reported though? The reason I ask is I remember, I can't remember if it was cattle and sheep or just cattle. I was speaking with Brian Brooks, who used to be the executive director of Idaho Wildlife Federation. And I believe he said there was something like 150 reported confirmed cases of animal loss annually in the state of Idaho. Seems
accurate. I could pull it up. I don't have the number right up.
No, it's fine. And like, I'm not trying to pin you down.
Right.
It's just like, okay, so if you're looking at, let's just say $1,200 for 150 animals, right? Like that's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. That's, somewhere in the order approaching $200,000.
Right.
$200,000 monetary loss statewide. And when the Fed is showing up with $24,098, like you're a little short.
Yeah. So last year, I was able to put together the last year's number. It looks like right around or over 150 investigations with right around 30 confirmed, plus or minus.
Oh, okay. So there were 150 calls for an investigator to go out, and 30 of those were confirmed to this was wolf or some animal depredation.
Well, it would have been wolf.
Oh,
wolf
just wolves. Just
yep,
wolves.
Yep,
okay.
Yep.
So there were 30 animals in the state of Idaho that investigators confirmed, about 150 calls for action.
Right.
Gotcha.
So then what? So then those people, previous to, and I'm talking pre this legislative session,
sure,
were able to get paid out for that, more than likely on a prorated basis.
Sure. Because the 30 at $1,200 is $36,000. So
right.
you have a shortfall there, obviously.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
So pause that story.
Put a pin in that.
Put a pin in that to tell you this story.
Okay.
This one's a lot shorter.
Great.
Grizzly bears, very similar situation. It's a listed species as threatened. And so, in Idaho right now, it's pretty easy to kill a wolf if you see one. It's not listed. It's not protected. The state is doing everything they can to get the wolf number to right around 500 in the state, where right now they're projecting right around 1,500.
Right. And you have a lot of private groups like Foundation for Wildlife Management, things
right.
like that.
Yeah. And they do a fantastic job of trying to bring that number down.
I've been trying to get their peeps on this show. I did a bunch of interviews with Carter Niemeyer, who's obviously on one side of the wolf issue, and then a bunch of episodes with wolf hunters. And I had the Stuck in the Rut guy from up in northern Idaho, and I had Seth Simpson, who's a houndsman, and he actually does contract work for coyotes and wolves. Like, I would love to have them on the show. Like, I do not bite. I have never harpooned anyone. Like, we're just having a conversation. I just want to have a conversation.
Yeah. I'll talk to my contact.
Yeah.
But
get Kate Small on here. I hit her up on they were doing a wolf hunting training in Cascade, I think. Mm-hmm. And for some reason they just stopped. I was initially trying to line things up, and then they just stopped wanting to come on. I'm like, guys, I'm not like, I'm like Switzerland. Like, right. Just come and tell me what your position is. So grizzly bears. So
the inspection process is a lot the same. Where a lot of grizzly bears are right now in the state is because of the way that the feds have them listed is, they have their ecosystems where they're supposed to be. So you have the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which is over encompassing Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. Then you have up north, You have the Selkirk's ecosystem, you have the Bitterroot ecosystem, and then in Montana, you have the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem. But you get a lot of transient bears as a result of this. Idaho doesn't. Idaho gets a lot of these bears. How there's spillover from these ecosystems,
Sure.
and so particularly over in eastern Idaho, especially this year alone, so far there have been 38 investigations of grizzly bear kill, and 23 confirmed. So that's a better number.
Sure.
But again, over there you have these huge allotments of grazing. You have to be able to have the animal, and if it's scavenged to the point where it's unrecognizable, or even my discernible mind would be like, I have no way of confirming whether or not that was killed by a grizzly bear. Because the other aspect of this too is there's a difference between if the grizzly bear or wolf killed the animal, or if the grizzly
just scavenged it,
or is scavenging it.
Yeah.
Because that's two completely different things. I could be struck by lightning and eaten by a grizzly bear, but I wasn't killed by a grizzly bear, right? So that's the idea. Well, but with grizzly bears, there's not that funding source. Through the Farm Service Agency, you could apply for some funding and get some recourse, but not to the extent of the wolf program. And so what kind of created a catalyst for this in the state was up north. Two young ladies had their 4-H animals. 4-H sheep killed by a grizzly bear. So this is, I kind of misspoke in a sense. A lot of this problem is happening, yes, in eastern Idaho because of the Yellowstone ecosystem, but it, of course, is up north as well.
Sure.
And so they spoke in the 2023 legislative session, they spoke in front of the legislature and said, look, our animals died because of grizzly bears. This is a problem. We want you guys to address it. But there's only so much the state can do, of course.
Right.
And so this year we were engaged in a bill. It was House Bill 592. And what it did was it created a $225,000 fund where $150,000 of it would be for grizzly bear and wolf depredation payouts. And then the remaining $75,000 would be for prevention efforts.
Awesome. So then giving people that are like deterrents or whatever.
Mm-hmm. It's primarily meant for grizzly bears because there isn't as much funding for grizzly bears as there is for wolves. But
Gotcha.
It is, of course, for both. Now, it passed. The kind of some of the drama that surrounded it a little bit was that it's kind of uncommon to have a designated amount in statute for anything, a designated monetary amount. It's supposed to go through the appropriations process. Now, of course, it does happen, and it has happened before. But that was just some concern from legislators. It's like, why aren't you going through JFAC? We're doing a bill instead. And so it got through and pretty much received bipartisan support, which is great and close to unanimous. But anyway, so what it does that is different from the Fed funding though is if there is money left over in the payout side of it.
Sure, that's 150.
That's 150. If there's money left over, then probable cases that are deemed probable, so the step down from confirmed, could be paid out.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And likely it would be prorated. And then, but regardless, at least those people are receiving some sort of recourse, right?
That's probably appropriate. Right, because it's probable, we don't know for sure, and it's probably appropriate that you get recourse. That's great.
Right. Of course, the confirmed are going to have the priority.
Right.
And
they'll get a full payout, and then
that's not guaranteed.
But let me walk that back. The confirmed get the priority, and then the probables again, secondary or subordinate.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You're correct. So that's something that was passed. The other thing that was passed. So you're now seeing. Okay, so we've dealt with animals that can be looked at and investigated, but what about those allotments or those areas where there is no body, but there is definitely a decrease in the number of animals from the time that you put them there to the time that you pull them off. So
I had 100 sheep. Now there are 95.
Correct.
where did they go?
Correct. So,
Right.
so there's been a lot of study into, what was the bring home rate, the not bring home rate in pre 95 compared to post 95.
Interesting.
And so a typical, don't come home rate would be around the 2 to 3%. After 95, you're getting into the 5, 6, 8%, if not higher. And so in wolf areas, now we're back to the wolf part.
Yeah.
So
and again, naturally, because of the absence of a carcass, it's like the perfect crime. Nobody can investigate something because they have no idea where the sheep or cow or whatever it was.
Correct. But I mean, what are the odds that 8% of your herd is being killed by a lightning strike or some sort of sickness?
Well, whatever the odds were, there's no reason that those odds would have doubled or tripled after at an acute point, right? So like whatever I have no idea, right? If you're saying, hey, look, 2 to 3%, and then we went to 8, 9%, that's a big change.
You're absolutely right. So Idaho has what's called the Wolf Depredation Control Board, and basically their job is to analyze, the depredations that are occurring and what's confirmed. Wildlife Services reports to this board, and then discuss control efforts. Wildlife Services does do control, but then people like F4WM and private individuals can be contracted so producers will recruit these trappers and hunters to come kill wolves in their neck of the woods. Yeah. They can then be reimbursed for the cost of that expense through the Depredation Control Board. The Depredation Control Board does not enter into contracts with anybody. They just pay for the contract, basically.
You find the best person that you have, bring me the receipts, and we'll go from there.
Mm-hmm. And people have gotten pretty creative as to avenues to maybe pursue that. One person, wanted to do what are those things that like have the propeller in the back and you fly?
Oh, parasail?
Yeah, kind of like that. That was the idea, and they didn't end up funding that.
That'd be pretty wild if you have parasail with a giant, what is it? It's like a lawnmower blade on the back and a shotgun and a boom.
Yeah, so
wild.
There was some. They were interested in the idea because aerial flying is approved in some areas of the state, but they just didn't go with that. There wasn't enough detail for that. But anyways, but they could not pay for damages. That was the caveat in the statute. Was they couldn't pay for damages. Well, that was amended this year as House Bill 612 to allow the board to pay for damages. So now whatever monies the board has left is probably how they'll end up doing it. They haven't written a rule for this yet, but I imagine what would happen is they're going to prioritize the control, and then at the end of a grazing season, when producers bring home their cattle, if there's if it falls shortfall, that can be demonstrated as to, okay, well, your percentage would reflect a high percentage of those that haven't come home. Yeah, probably a livestock loss from wolves. So then they could be paid out that way as well.
Man, the creative solutions to problems that people experience in Idaho and just keeping the industries going. I was talking to Lieutenant Governor Scott Becky the other day, and the pragmatism that you engage in or experience here, if you're really trying to solve a problem, it's like he was talking about the water agreement, and he was saying, listen, there are 4 things that we never said: Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. Like he was like, we were focused exclusively on figuring out a solution that didn't put people out of business, that honored water rights, the senior and junior system. Like, that's what we were there for. And I feel like this is obviously, you're articulating a very similar process, which is, hey, look, if I have a livelihood based on keeping sheep or cattle alive and fattening them up and selling parts of them or all of them or whatever it might be, like I am interested in solutions. I'm not interested in political leanings. If I've lost money, I would like to be made whole. If I've lost money from this way, this particular way, then who's helping me out here? And like, I just so appreciate that. It just seems wholly fair. It's like, hey, let's work together, because I have spoken with many people who love wolves, that love wolves are here, and they love that grizzly bears are here, and they love that we have this predator ecosystem. There's also a very strong argument that I've heard, and I don't know if it's true or not, but it made sense to me. They're like, listen, you have imbalances like you see in Wyoming. Certain areas of Wyoming are giving unlimited elk tads because certain areas and herds have gotten too unwieldy. And and they're like, listen, we need predators to control these herds. There's also I also heard that throughout the 70s and 80s of Yellowstone, you had the mass Yellowstone herd that was making it more difficult for other herbivore species to exist, like mule deer or bison or things of that nature. They're like, listen, if you have an explosion of elk, you're going to, like, these animals, herbivores, compete against each other for limited resources. That's just the way this goes. And if you have one spreading like cockroaches, then the other ones are going to suffer from limited resources.
Yeah, it's called carrying capacity.
Yeah, right. Like, and that's an actual problem. And they were engaging, as in people managing for instance, the Yellowstone herd, were engaging in like late season hunts, just like pop people off, not people, but elk.
Right. Right.
But again, there are arguments all around loving wolves, hating wolves, using them to thin out herds so that other populations can thrive, all of these things. But at the end of the day, if you and I are running cattle or running sheep or trying to grow wool, I don't care. I just care about being made whole for my livelihood. And I love that Idaho's coming at it from the standpoint. It's like, okay, look, how can we help?
Right. And so what you're describing, I mean, you're absolutely right, in the sense of that. Well, there are these different conversations, and there are objectives to be met in the sense of, we have a chronic wasting disease problem in the state or in the United States, and it's
the ungulate population,
right? And it's starting to show up more into Idaho, which is very unfortunate.
Can you just explain what chronic wasting disease is?
It is a prion disease. So basically, it's a disease of the brain that basically just starts this shutdown of ungulates, deer, and they just waste away. I mean, that's basically what it is, and it's very contagious. It's spread through contact. From my understanding, and forgive me, I'm not an expert on this, but from my understanding, if a deer urinates on a plant, and that prion has such a persistent half-life that it can live on that plant, be consumed by another deer, and then that deer can get it. And so it's terrible. And it's in other states, it's causing herds to be thinned radically. And so we're not necessarily talking about that, but that's an argument that pro-wolf advocates make, is that wolves help with the chronic wasting disease problems by helping thin out these deer that are slower, skinnier, and aren't as robust as other deer. They target those, the runt of the group. And so, but to your point, in this conversation about carrying capacity, like I said earlier, the state has, or projects that they have around 1,500 wolves. Well, the goal to maintain what you just talked about of wildlife management, but also to maintain a non-listed species, being wolves, is 500. So if what you're describing, which if it's true,
like
then
the value and functionality, it's like, okay, we've arrived at the value and functionality. Now we have diminishing returns.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
And so we have this 1,000 animal gap, which is insanity. 1,000 animals that is exceeding the carrying capacity for potentially what you're describing as far as, wildlife management, but also for the economics of agriculture to flourish in the livestock industry here in Idaho.
Right. And I was talking to, again, Lieutenant Governor Becky the other day, and asking him, hey, look, how do we increase the longevity of the beef industry? Because his license plate is like Beef 1 or something. It's fantastic, like so cool. And we weren't chatting about this. He doesn't have all day to just pontificate, but he was saying, I was like, first eat beef, we got to move the product and, support local, all kinds of different things. Right. But at the end of the day, it's important to have these conversations, because if we don't support the foundational industries, like I did not grow up on a beef, cattle farm, and
most people haven't.
Ranch. Right. So I am removed from this problem to some degree, but I am gravely affected by it, in that the industry that this state thrives on is related to that. And even though I don't experience it on a daily basis, like I love seeing the longhorns across the street. Like, yeah, great. Like I love, Highland. God, the Highland cows are so cool. we have a giant, my wife got this gigantic painting actually of this Highland cow that was, it's like blue and it's like these gigantic.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
It's so gorgeous.
Yeah.
And I just love it. Anyway, the point is I'm not like a cow guy. I don't have this life experience, but I want Idaho's economy to stay strong and having this kind of thing where it's like, okay, look, you should consider this. Right. And as with most things, man, it's like, dude, it seems like both people are right. Or at least both, like we should not eliminate every single wild entity that gets in our way, except goat heads. Those guys can just die. Goat heads are the worst. But like we should manage it.
You're absolutely right. So I came into Farm Bureau with the unique perspective where, yes, I did grow up on a cattle ranch, but no, I didn't spend a lot of time hunting or fishing. We were too busy to do anything related to hunting or fishing. So this has been.
So am I.
Yeah.
I'm in here every day. I gotta get more sunshine.
So for me, this has been, of course, a learning experience, and you're absolutely right. It can be viewed from two different perspectives, and the way that I fear that, and a lot of people fear, especially the cattle industry, is this perception that cattle are killing us in the sense of, red meat is bad for your health or it's bad for the environment. Well, we forget, everything has an opportunity cost associated with it.
What is it? Forks over knives and all of those, like.
Right.
I was talking to Dr. Phil Bass about this. It's like there has been a war waged against, the cattle.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
and so you look at like perhaps, these fires that occurred this year or just general land management. Cattle are instrumental in caring for the public lands of this state and not just this state, but other states. And so when we consider that, you have to consider the fact that, yes, cattle are part of our vital economy here in Idaho. We get so much return off of the cattle in this state, more so than potatoes. And so then when you view that just from the economic standpoint, but also the environmental ecological standpoint of, what it's doing for our forest ground, for our BLM ground, for our state ground, we get a lot of non-monetary returns. As an individual who may not be involved in the cattle industry, you get the returns of having cattle.
You know what I get? I get to not have a smoker's cough for 3 months.
Right.
Right.
You're absolutely right.
This summer, the mismanagement of that stuff, of the federal lands and then the wildfires, and just recognizing like, dude, there are grass fires, all kinds of things. And this is part of what keeps this state functioning. You're not just engaging in an economic pursuit. You're actually decreasing the risk to gigantic fires that, like, for literally 3 months, I was in here doing shows, just coughing off mic like I smoked 5 packs 2 seconds before. It was horrific.
You're absolutely right. And so then when we get back to the topic of wolves, and the management of wolves, you have to remember that, the big concern, and I don't think it's unjustified, but I don't think it's entirely justified, is big ag. In Idaho, we still have family farms. We are a family farm state. They may be a little bigger, but we are still a family farm state.
Right.
And family ranch state. And so when I lose as an individual an animal that's worth $1,200, that can have an huge impact on my bottom line. And so, when that's happening to individuals in the Cascade area, or Cascade or any other area in the state, whether it be grizzly bears, wolves, whatever, right. That can really impact my year and my success and what my outlook is going forward.
Sure, man. I mean, look, I don't know if I spend $1,200 on Christmas presents.
Right.
Right. And I got 3 little boys. I mean, it's a lot, right? Like, it's a lot to consider, and things are getting more and more expensive. Man, there's a lot going on.
I guess to kind of put the ribbon on this is now the conversation is, okay, so we have this state money. We now we have the autonomy over how we do this, but do we have the expertise and do we have the manpower? And that's the question. And so we are looking at avenues on how to make the state the autonomy over over this fund, inspecting, whatever the case may be. And so that's what we're that's what we're exploring, avenues for that, how to bring in that expertise, perhaps from wildlife services, from somebody else. We're just exploring that. And so yeah, that's what we're exploring.
Right. Because again, all of the laws, I mean, you can have laws, you can have programs, you can have it. None of that matters if you can't enforce or engage in them.
Right.
Right. Like you can have whatever law you want, but if there's no penalty if you break the law, it doesn't matter. Right. You can have any program you want, but if there's not somebody who's physically going out and checking all the boxes and accepting the applications and doing the reviews and then cutting the check, like that takes manpower.
Right.
And especially when you're dealing with things of the nature of investigations and engaging in individuals that are, just by the nature of their business, probably in a very, very, very rural, remote area where they're running around with like hundreds and thousands of cows. That takes a lot of man time, right? There's not a fast track to do that. It's not something you can do over, say, Zoom.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You're absolutely right. You have to have the person right there.
Yeah. Dexton, I appreciate you, sir.
Yeah, this has been a blast.
It's been a blast. Thank you for coming out. Let's keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
Every time I talk to somebody from the Farm Bureau, I really enjoy it. And the feedback I get is great too. Like people from across the state are like, oh, I had no idea. And especially for dum-dums like me, I definitely had no idea about this stuff. So Thank you for coming in. Let's do it again.
Yeah, thank you.